Hey, how are you today? This is Patrick. I'll get my own name right someday. And you're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. And my guest today is Matthew Kimberly. And boy, are you in for a treat. Matthew is, I don't know how long I've known Matthew for, but it's a long time. I met him through a program called Book Yourself Salad. He is now the president of the Book Yourself Salad International. I think he lives in Malta these days, although he tends to move around the world a lot. And he is one of the most interesting people we are ever going to have a conversation with. So I want to bring Matthew right on so we don't waste time with me talking about him. He can talk about himself. Hey, Matthew, how are you today?
Well, Josh, after that intro, I don't think my day could possibly get any better, except I get to spend some time with you. So it's almost guaranteed it's going to be better.
Well, I got to tell you, this is such a huge treat for me that you're on the show again. I mean, I think I know it's at least your second time, maybe your third time with us.
That's right. And it's been too long.
It has been too long, but we're both busy and you've been doing great stuff with Book Yourself Salad, and I'm very impressed with watching you from afar. But let's talk a little bit about, the blue collar subcontractor and marketing. Too often these folks feel like they need to take anyone who walks in the door as a customer, whether it's the right person or not. Why is that the wrong thing to do?
The red velvet rope policy that we preach at Book Yourself Solid is a filtration device. And in practice, what it means is that you choose your clients rather than having your clients choose you. And if you were to take the dating analogy, which is a useful one because you have to spend a lot of time at work interacting with people, the idea that you were obliged to date or be in a long-term relationship with, or even a short-term relationship, even a dinner with somebody that you weren't also on board with sounds horrific. Yet in business, we tend to use that yardstick and say, well, if the price is right and if the opportunity is there, then I should take it. Now, what happens when you work with clients who are perhaps less than ideal? For whatever reason, they might be a perfect client for somebody else, but for whatever reason, not a great client for you. Perhaps the project, perhaps the location, perhaps their personality, perhaps their expectations, perhaps their budget, or their politics. I mean, why not if we're going to be spending a lot of time with somebody? What happens is there's this tension, there's this friction, which we can't always erase. And when this friction exists, it's absolutely guaranteed that the experience is going to be less than optimal. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be a terrible experience for everybody, but it does mean it's going to be less than optimal. And what happens is when the market or the friends, colleagues, golfing buddies of your clients have a conversation about you, which they will, because we love to talk about our contractors and the experience that we're having with them. That less than optimal bit, that friction, is going to be the bit that's manipulated, the bit that's amplified, because that always happens. If you have an okay experience, then you find the parts that were perhaps problematic. How was your meal? Well, it was okay, but the bread was a little bit stale. If you have an exemplary experience, then you're shouting about that bit. So the cutoff point for what people talk about is the minuscule bit that goes wrong, the minuscule bit that is suboptimal, unless the overall experience is terrific. Now, the only way the overall experience is going to be terrific, even if you encounter difficulties and problems and you go over budget or you run over time or a wall falls down or there's flooding, the only way that we can have that terrific experience is if both parties are bought into having a terrific experience. And that's only going to happen if you work with the best kind of person. And of course, then what happens is you attract more of that kind of client. Plus, you have a more enjoyable experience, which allows you to come to work with a spring in your step. And the virtuous cycle continues ad infinitum.
One thing I've found is that when you have the best client, you've identified the best client, and you only work with the best client, it becomes a wash, rinse, repeat sort of thing, is that you go a lot faster, you're a lot better, and it costs you a lot less to service them. When you're doing one-offs or you're working with difficult customers, one also where you're just working on one project and you're never going to do the same sort of thing again. The only thing that happens is that you lose money and you get frustrated. I can tell you that from personal experience. In fact, we used to have a tax for our really difficult customers in our catering business, which I won't say the name of, but it was a difficult customer tax. You can think of what the other name is. And the reason very simply was that we knew they were going to take more time and effort, and we need to get paid for that.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense to you?
It makes perfect sense to me. Also, the bit that we forget is perhaps a perfect match client is going to give you more wiggle room that you won't necessarily need. And by that, I mean, if you're in a relationship with a client who is equally bought into the experience as you and who shares the same goals and dreams and outcomes and has the kind of bill paying, respecting mentality that we want an ideal client to have, not only are you going to bring your A game, but on the days when you need that wiggle room, you're more likely to get it. So everybody's happier. There's more patience. There's more joyfulness, and there is always more money when that happens. If you find a client who is as thrilled to work with you as you are to work with them, then they will be as thrilled to write the check that you expect to get. And this is something that really has to be learned through experience. And when you start to apply this, I'm not going to work with these difficult customers, to use that euphemism. When you develop that process or that practice, very soon the prospect of working with somebody who is less than ideal becomes deeply unattractive, and that gives you a sense of enormous well-being and control and power. And you start to see the marketplace as being an area that you are able to dominate rather than be at the mercy of. But it comes with practice. You have to have experienced failures of this red velvet rope policy in order to truly appreciate its importance, I believe.
And there's one more thing that I would add to all the list of stuff that you get when you work with the right customer is you have more trust. And with more trust, you get to do a whole bunch of stuff where you're not trying to overcome the distrust that happens when it's not the right person to work with. So here's a question I have for you. Okay, we've agreed, and all the folks listening agree that we need to work with the right customer. How do we identify what that right customer looks like?
Well, there's two practical considerations, the psychographic and the demographic. The psychographic is the list of inherent qualities that you would expect in somebody who's going to get to become a customer or a client of yours. And these are very similar to the kind of standards that you would tolerate in an ideal world with your family members, or at least the family members you choose rather than the ones who you share blood with. So you would say, I'll give you a concrete example. My ideal client is a stickler for timekeeping, and not because punctuality is necessarily important for me, but I think it's a sign of deep respect. If you recognize that somebody else's time is valuable and you are prepared to show up to appointments on time, then that's a pretty good indicator of the kind of person they are. My ideal client is polite to the server. I find that anybody who's not, I find that deeply, deeply unattractive, and it shows a side of their personality which is not one that I necessarily want to interact with. My ideal client takes responsibility for themselves, and you can tell this by asking questions at the getting to know you stage. Tell me about previous projects. Tell me why you haven't done the thing that you were going to do now. My ideal client is generally an optimist. It doesn't mean they don't have bad experiences, but if I bump into a customer who says, the last 5 building contractors that I've hired let me down terribly, and I haven't had a good experience ever in my entire life with anybody, sure, there's going to be a little bit of sympathy on my part, but I'm going to ask, is perhaps the problem you? or your expectations. Another thing that I ask for is that they share my sense of humor, not because everybody has to share my sense of humor, but if I'm going to be offending people with my language or with my jokes during the course of our interactions, then that's not very happy. So I might crack a few jokes or slip in a few cuss words during the application process and just see how it lands. Now, I'm always looking for the best, but I'm also actively seeking to disqualify. Here's what happens when you get the system in place. And people listening to this will say, well, this sounds terrifying because I need the money. I don't want to turn down a contract, and I'll do it if the money's right. And we all have a price, assuming it's legal. And for many of us, even if it's not legal, we've all got a price somewhere. But when you get into, you can't just take this ideal client piece and leave everything else. You can't say, I only work with ideal clients, but I'm not prepared to do the work to find them. Or I only work with ideal clients, but my pricing has to be up here, and if they don't pay, then I'm not going to do it. You have a systematic approach to attracting customers, bringing them into your world, allowing them to get to know you. When you do that, you start to see beyond the contract in front of you and start to recognize that there is a whole world of possibility out there for you. So sometimes we have to be a bit flexible. If we know that we're going to be short on next month's mortgage payment, sure, we're going to work with a slightly less than ideal client. But once we get a taste for it, once we get a taste for business class or first class, it's very difficult to sit in the back of the plane again.
Yeah, this is really interesting. The stuff you all just talked about was all psychographic. None of it was demographic. And the truth is, when I talk to subcontractors or literally anybody in business, and I ask them who their ideal client is, they always give me demographics. And even the demographics are pretty crummy. They often give me. They never mention psychographics. So psychographics, in my opinion, come from values. Can you talk a little bit about how important it is for you to develop personal values that have a clarifying statement around it so you know what's important for you and you can communicate to those you work with?
Well, Josh, I don't know if this is a question for me or a question that I may ask my therapist from time to time. What do I want to see when I look in the mirror? But that's kind of or when I look in my children's eyes and they said, what did you do today? Who did you work with? How did you compromise? Did you laugh at something that you shouldn't have laughed at? Did you agree to something that you shouldn't have agreed to? Now, can you look at yourself in the mirror? Or depending on your beliefs, can you present yourself to the gentleman at the pearly gates and say, yes, I acted in accordance with what I felt was right? That's a pretty good yardstick. And there's no judgment. What's right for you might be wrong for somebody else, and vice versa. But when marketing, client attraction, client re-upping, so clients coming back to you, repeat business, it's all down to magnetism. And by magnetism, I mean your ability to attract and keep people with you. Now, the flip side, and magnetism in and of itself is not just about attraction. You cannot be magnetic without being attractive and repellent. So very often, when you're trying to work out what kind of values that you want to live by, and also the values that you want to put out into the marketplace, if you find it difficult, or if all of your answers sound like Miss World answers, what is important to you? World peace, harmony. Yeah, sure. Same for all of us, right? Same for all of us.
Right.
But if you want to be truly magnetic and attract and keep the kind of people who will be stuck to you, sometimes it's worth thinking about the flip side. What do I not tolerate? What do I not stand for? And your answer might be Republicans. Or your answer might be liberals. I want to repel these people. And I don't want to go down it could be meat eaters, or it could be vegetarians. We're going to pick something that we're against. We may not be very, very, very strongly against it. But the more strongly we stand against something, the more we're going to find our right people. Because if you look at the most influential and sticky, and by sticky I mean magnetic, attractive people in the world, they are very, very polarizing. So if you're having trouble working out what you're for, write a list of the things that you're against and maybe advertise them. Maybe speak about them in public. Maybe rather than trying to please everybody, we try to please that subset of people who are more likely to hang out with us. And then our values will become clear and known and true. And there are various direct and indirect ways of broadcasting our values when we know what they are. But a very useful place for people to start if they're trying to work out what their values are, particularly professionally, is to ask, what kind of contract would I not take and why? Which industries would I not work with and why? Would you work with somebody who made their money from gambling? Would you work with somebody who made their money from owning a casino? Would you work with somebody who made their money from, I don't know, animal testing or tobacco? And you can start to actually make a pretty clear idea of what's important to you. And these start to filter through, and you realize that when you're happy to communicate your personal brand values with the world, then the right people will correspondingly respond to that.
Yeah, I find the easiest way to do what you just talked about, which is you develop your own personal values. For example, my core value is personal responsibility. If you're going to blame others, you're going to justify your way through the world, you are not going to be happy working with me, because I will just take you apart. And another one for me is, as you can tell from what I just said, I am incredibly blunt. And if you want non-blunt, I'm not your guy. So it's really important to know who you are, what you stand for, and those values, the anti-value for that value is the people you want to repel.
Yeah.
And if you're clear about that, it's really pretty easy to do. In fact, we think that's the first step of creating what we call sustainable business. If you know your values, you can be values-led. You put it on your website, you use it in your hiring, you use it in your client attraction program, you use it with literally everybody you work with, and you should be using your values multiple times a day, not, you put them on the wall and just leave them there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they should guide every decision. I believe
Yeah.
they should guide every decision. You may choose to have an alter ego or an optimum version of yourself, and you run everything through the filter. What would Matthew 2.0 do? What would the best version of Josh do in this situation? How would he respond? And that's useful in every aspect of our life. If we've got a customer who's unhappy, how would we like to tell the story later about how we dealt with it? And can we live with ourselves from can we look our kids in the eye? Can we look ourselves in the mirror and say, I ran this course of action through my flowchart, my internal compass, if you like, and I'm happy with the way it's come out.
Yeah, you just mentioned trust again. And I remember it was at one of Michael Port's programs, I don't know, maybe 10, 12, 13 years ago. We had Charles Green come in from the Trusted Advisor to talk with us. And Charles has this formula, which I've been using ever since I ever ran across it, from the book, The Trusted Advisor, which is intimacy, which means how much you care about another person, plus competence, plus reliability, divided by self-interest, will tell you how much you trust somebody. Right. Do you use something like that when you're analyzing whether you want to work with somebody?
I'm not familiar with that equation. I'm going to slowly unpack it when I listen to the replay. Another thing that Michael Port used to say, and what I think of when I think of trust, is you build trust by doing what you say you're going to do.
Yes.
And that doesn't necessarily happen overnight. Perhaps you have to do what you say you're going to do 5, 6 times for somebody who perhaps isn't inclined to trust, to say, okay, Josh is somebody who has been consistent. I think that was one of the parts of your equation, being consistent in the past. And of course, we can then lose trust very, very quickly by not doing what we say we're going to do once. And I struggled with this for a little while, because I am by my nature a people pleaser. And
yes.
What that meant was I tended to take on, because I didn't want to disappoint up front. Somebody would say, perhaps a potential client, perhaps a business partner would say, can you do this? And I'd say, yes. I was optimistic when it came to the amount of time in my calendar, or the amount of resources I had available to me, or my skill set sometimes. And I realize now, I'm much happier saying no upfront. And there's no correlation at all between trust and refusal. You know, if I say yes, I'm going to let you down. Therefore, I'm going to say no. I'm afraid that's not going to be possible. And if you can't live with that, that's okay. At least I've been in integrity rather than promise something that I can't deliver. Certainly my experience of working with building contractors in my part of the world is that overconfidence on deadlines and budgets is something which is frequent in my experience. And if I found somebody I was going to hire who said, no, I absolutely can't do this in the next 2 weeks, but I am confident that as long as access remains and the weather holds out, that within 4 weeks it will be done. I'd sooner hire that guy based upon my experience now than the person who promised the fastest, right?
It's always good to tell the truth about stuff. And the thing is, when you do screw up and you are late, as long as you take responsibility for it, you're likely to be able to regain trust because you're being honest with folks. So, Matthew, we've almost gone through our time here. And I know this is just one piece of the Book Yourself Solid system, isn't it?
Yeah, Book Yourself Solid is a systematic approach to getting and attracting and keeping happy clients. And one of the fundamental principles we've spoken about today, which is there are some people you're meant to serve and others not so much. But one of the other critical pieces is that marketing doesn't get you clients. And many people in every industry start with marketing. They think if I have the biggest budget, or if I have the loudest voice, or the greatest social media following, or if I'm on TV more hours than my competition, then I will win the business. And we know from experience across every industry that's just not true. It might get you a lot of eyeballs, but it's what you do with those eyeballs and how you treat the people that are wearing the eyeballs over time that counts. And so Book Yourself Solid has designed an entire system where marketing comes last. We start with building out a foundation about who we're going to serve, what specifically we're going to do for them, why they should choose us instead of everybody else. And then looking at long-term client nurture processes, trust building exercises, credibility building exercises, allowing people to make investments in you that are proportionate to the amount of trust that you've earned. And then when that capture and nurture and tender loving care system is baked into our business, at that point then we can say, well, what kind of marketing makes sense to reach the very clearly defined demographic target market that I want to go after right now.
Yeah, my thing, I've always been saying marketing and sales are two very different activities. And my simple way of saying this is marketing creates awareness, sales creates customers. Absolutely. And if you're opening a new business, you're going to do sales. You're not even going to get to marketing. But once you get some, revenue coming in on a regular basis, then you really need to really pivot and realize they are very two different things. And it's hard to find somebody to do both, is my experience. Hey, Matthew, we're unfortunately going to have to leave it here. And we could go on for a long time about all this stuff. Both you and I have a real passion for it. I know that. So how do people find Book Yourself Solid? How do they find you? How do they get involved in it? And in my opinion, and I've said this for years, Book Yourself Solid is the best marketing program I have ever run across. And if you're listening to this and you don't take advantage of it, I hate to say this, but you're an idiot.
Even more so now, Josh, because we give away the vast majority of our educational-based resources completely free of charge. If you go to bookyourselfsolid.com and give us your email address, we'll give you hours of masterclasses, we'll give you workbooks, we'll give you access to a community who can answer your questions. And I'd say that's where you start. And if you for any reason allergic to the internet, go to the library, check out a copy of Book Yourself Solid, which has sold more than 1 million copies, being translated into dozens of languages, and apply. And if you have trouble applying it, because there's one There's a big difference between having theoretical knowledge of something and actually executing on that knowledge. Then at that point, you can get back in touch with us again and say, hey, I need help, and we can introduce you to a Book Yourself Solid certified professional, or you could join one of our programs where we can help you put the information into play in your business. So bookyourselfsolid.com is a great place to get started with that.
Cool. I have two things I would like you to do. The first one is I've asked forever and ever and ever, probably 360 times now, which is please go to wherever you're listening to this podcast and give us an honest rating and review. And while you're at it, subscribe. We've been doing this now for almost 7 years, and we have had tons and tons of great guests like Matthew come on and share their wisdom with you. The second thing I'd like you to do is I've written 2 books, and my second one is out in the wild. It's called The Sale Ready Company. And Sale Ready does not mean that you're about to sell your company. It means that other people want to buy it. If you get your company in shape to have other people want to buy it, you are going to have more fun, make more money, and love your business. It's a novel. It's not a how-to book. It's a story, and people love stories. At least I do. And it's really easy to get. I'm actually selling for half price on my website. So if you go to www.salereadycompany.com, that's www.salereadycompany.com. You can buy the book, get some bonuses, even have a free 20-minute conversation with me if you're so inclined. So thanks a lot for stopping by today. This is Josh Patrick. We're with Matthew Kimberly. You're at Cracking the Cashflow Code. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here really soon.